Meeting, and at the opening of the meeting, I have just a brief announcement that this meeting is being recorded in the future for live streaming purposes, but just to notice to everyone here that this meeting is being recorded. Move on to item 2.01, a financing plan update. Mr. Longwell, turn over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Sanker. This evening we have Mr. Brad Remick and I believe Mrs. Hughes.
She's not feeling well, so
Okay.
we gave her the night off.
All right, no, just Mr. Remick. He's here to update the board on our financing plan, and so as the board recalls, we've had several iterations of the financing plan where we've been on a journey here of elementary construction projects, how we finance them, and now as we turn our attention to our secondary projects and we look at the senior high and the financing needs connected to that. Just pointing out a couple quick summary items is the total financing is unchanged. It's still $50 million in 3 steps. As the board recalls, we had already conducted step 1, and now we're focused on step 2, which is a borrowing of about $30 million. Mr. Remick's gonna walk through a little bit of the interest rate environment, and then talk a little bit about where are we with our financing plan. Before we jump into that though, I did wanna also recognize Mrs. Bobby Ely is here. She's our Assistant Business Manager and Controller. She's been a welcome addition to the team and is a great, I'll say a great partner in helping to manage the district finances. So without further ado, I'll maybe turn it over to Mr. Remick.
You got it. When I first started coming here, I didn't need these, but now I need them.
Me too.
I know. Anyway, I believe before the meeting, we hand a hard copy on your desks, on your chairs, so that's what I'll step through. A lot of the things that you'll see in there are relatively familiar. We're just updating them, as Greg mentioned, with some of the plan. I do want to thank the administration. They've been very thoughtful and available to talk through all these things to get to the point. It was great to have Bobby on the last call, so thank you to all of you for your attention to these important matters. I apologize, Melissa's under the weather. You've seen Melissa, so like I said, we gave her the night off. Make sure she feels better. But anyway, I'll kind of step through some of these pages quickly. I think if I'm not mistaken, I've got about 7 or 10 minutes here to go through it.
Sorry.
But I can do it. I can do it.
I think we gave you 2 at one time.
I think we got 2. The first page that you see has a page number 2 on the bottom right. This is the interest rate chart that you've been seeing from us historically. Right now, you'll notice a couple things I want to point out. I'll point out on the top chart, you'll notice that there's a red line there, which is currently what we call the yield curve. If you remember, you plot data points for a 1-year rate through 30 years. You'll notice it's very flat, and in fact, it's somewhat inverted for the first 10 years. So while you're seeing the Federal Reserve raise long-term interest rates, their actions seem to be working. Today, a CPI number came out for inflation. It was a little slower than expected. That was good for the bond market. That, ironically enough, even though the Fed is expected to raise 50, there's an outside chance of 75 tomorrow. That's baked in, and it does look like the long-term rates, as we get to the bottom chart, have been coming down. I think there were folks that thought that the rates were going to have to continue to go up at a faster pace, but as things have slowed, it's probably good for our market right now. So I don't think we're going to get back to where we were when we were doing the financings back 2-3 years ago, but it does seem to be making some improvement in the market. Page 3, I'll go through this really quickly. You've seen this from us before. It lists all your different bonds with the debt service payments by fiscal year. And if you go to the top column, column 10 on the upper right-hand side, you'll notice that right now your debt service is about $9.8 million, dropping down to $8 million, and we'll see what's going to happen with that as we look at this next financing. The bottom nets out some plan com that you qualify for supplier bond, including the elementary projects. But that's kind of where we stand if we do nothing as of today. And this is the page. Page 4 is the page that I think kind of tries to summarize it all for you in one page. You know, it is interesting. It used to be a little bit more narrow, but now we need to summarize things and you know, make the page a little bit wider. But we try and keep it on one page for the board so we can not get too complex with the details. But column number 1 in the blue, those were the financings that were largely done for the elementary schools, and a little bit, about 20 or 25 million towards these projects. In the red, we did a small refinancing where you saved a little bit of money. You can see that in the red. As Greg mentioned, the green column, that's the column of interest rates that were locked in for the first step of $10 million. So that's already been completed as well. And then in the purple is what we're talking about now. The purple is approximately $30 million, as Greg mentioned. 10 was the first one, 30 would be the second one, because I think this is really when the money's gonna be needed over this next spring and summer and fall. And then the light blue or aqua in column number 5, that would be the wrap-up $10 million piece that we would do once we had all the costs together, figured out how much money and contingencies you needed, but that would be the estimate for that. But we're really focusing on, in the purple column would be the next step for you. Some of the columns to the far right, you're familiar with. We've used a combination of, what I'll call smaller tax increases of 1 to 1.5% for debt service, that is. And those are shown in column 19. And then we've also used, if you remember, some of your cash, because some of the payments are coming on more quickly than the millage would be coming on, since you're trying to do this in a gradual fashion and take your time pacing it in. So there's some money of cash being used for the district to make up the difference during those periods of time. And then you'll notice in column 24, with those proposed increases as well as the cash, we still have to get a little bit more money, whether they be expense reductions, different savings you can find from doing some of these efficient projects, or whatever the case may be. We still probably need to identify a little bit of money to be able to fully phase in. Again, part of the reason we're buying some time for the district to phase in these financings. So that's where we are. Happy to answer any questions, but we think the 30 million is going to get you through 2023 for the middle school, high school, things that you're well aware of.
Mr. Remy, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, Brad, I know we can only, borrow 10 million a year. So when do you anticipate that we would do the number 5, the step 3, to borrow the next 10 million?
Right there, we're assuming about a similar time as next year.
March?
Yeah, the way that this works, and I'll go through the timeline just in a second. The 10 million, if you remember, that is, you can borrow more than $10 million. Okay, you have a little legal capacity you're allowed to do, which we're within. But the 10 million, the reason we've taken advantage of that is when you can, if you borrow less than 10 million in a calendar year, not a school year, but a calendar year, it's what's called bank qualified. And those typically carry lower interest rates and more favorable prepayment provisions. That's just what the market accepts. So I don't know if we're gonna be able to take advantage of that this year just because of the demands of need for cash. But that's why we try to do it on step 1, and we're hoping to do it on step 3. So all it makes it is non-bank qualified, and we just have typically it's 8 years till you can prepay instead of 5. And when I say the rates are a little bit higher for non-bank qualified, right now it's about 0.25%, which is meaningful, don't get me wrong, but it's not like you're paying a full percent more to borrow that.
So the repayment is really the bigger
Yes.
benefit.
Yes, right. So we try and do it when we can, but I think this year just the cash needs are greater than we would be able to do that, and we want to make sure you have the money you need to do the projects. So if the board is okay with proceeding with the plan, the next page, page 5, would be a sample resolution. I think you've seen these before, where you would appoint the team to move forward at your January meeting. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, we might be spending Valentine's Day together as a board meeting, and that would be the day we would lock the interest rate, get the bids in, and report back to the board how the $30 million result went. And the other thing that'll be happening is just after the holidays, I'll be working with Bobby and Greg, and we'll be getting official statements together, credit ratings together, things of that nature, after the holiday starts. So we'll give you a little bit of a break.
Mhm.
We don't want to hit that with Bobby with that, right, say Christmas break, but I think we can do this in a good fashion, move that process.
Any other questions regarding this? I will say, since we have an audience, this is, even though you did a very good job in keeping us on schedule, this is not the first time we've heard about this.
Yes,
And
this
we've
is
been
true.
working toward this for some period of time. So thank you for a good presentation and good question over there. that's all we have for,
I
go
just-
ahead, please.
I think not only have we been working on it for a period of time, but we rode a roller coaster, a pretty significant roller coaster, and still was able to stay with this plan. So we're not looking at additional borrowing, even though that was a real possibility, I would say 60 to 90 days ago, is a concern and a consideration. The fact that we're able to do this plan in this market still is to be noted.
Yeah.
But Brad, you said that the bond loans are lower, but what is your anticipation come February 14th?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously, this is the plan that I think we can do as quickly as possible, plus or minus a week or two. So we want to prepare for that, and if we do get to February 14th and things aren't looking good, we'll have to just have a conversation about that and figure out where we are from here. I do think that as long as the data keeps coming in the way I've seen it come in from CPI, the Fed, we kind of keep an eye on all that. Maybe a lot of this inflation's behind us. I cringe to even say that, but I'm hoping maybe, I don't know, but that's what seems to be the message that we've been seeing. So, that's why we want to get you ready as quickly as possible.
I mean, is there a point where we'd say, well, like if you say, it's gonna be behind us, do we wait another month or two and it might be lower?
Well, I think that's why, again, if we prepare for this, we're ready to go earlier, and then we would have the ability to see where we're at. And, sometimes I get a little worried about waiting another month, just because I know what I have, and I know if the market's stable and so forth. You've done a really good job, this board's done a really good job of not putting all the eggs in one basket. We've done this over time. We've been in good markets, good rough markets, but you've kind of not put all your eggs in one basket and kind of take pieces at it. So at the end of the day, you might be some higher markets, lower markets, but you haven't gone and jumped in all at once.
I think, and that maybe alludes to a little bit of the timeline there. I think you probably see the or later. And so as Mr. Remig said, we want to plan for that February, but we do have a couple Federal Reserve meetings in between there. One's in December, I think
Once
one's in
tomorrow, yeah, you get an announcement tomorrow.
January. And so, depending what happens there, what happens with the market, it could be February, it could be March, but I think it's just about getting authorizations in place, getting a mechanism ready for the borrowing, and then we would judge the market as we get closer, so.
But we gotta make sure you get your money for your projects here.
Yeah.
Even-
And I just wanna say again too, that, we've had below 1%. And if we go to, 3 or 4% average over the 20 years that we're, making payments, we've come out really ahead
Mhm.
over the long run, over many years.
If I'm given 20 more seconds, you go back to the chart in the middle, you'll notice we took the 10-year municipal bond rate, and in blue, where we currently are, if you notice in that legend, it says current rates. If you look at the last 30 years, 67% of the time they've been higher. So 2/3 of the time rates have been higher than they are today, and 1/3 they've been lower if you look at history. That to me shows that history, this is still a pretty good time. to be borrowing.
We were just spoiled for.
We're spoiled.
We benefited from that 1/3.
Yeah, right, for sure. So still from a historical perspective, more than half the time the rates have been higher.
I think the final piece to it all, and maybe Dr. Lighty alluded a little bit to it, is the financing plan is really about managing cash flow and kind of the mortgage payment, so to speak. And so when you think about the path we've been on, some of these conversations started all the way back in 2016, maybe to Mr. Sanker's point. We've had a lot of iterations of the financing plan, but we've worked the plan. You look at our fund balance during the last 6-7 years, it's been steady. You look at how we're building the budget up, and so that's what you really want to see, is that we're providing funds for the construction project, we're building our budget up, and then we're still maintaining a strong financial position. And so I think that's a real credit to the board. It's a credit to the help PFM's, the guidance and advice they've given us along the way. And I think I'm, overall very pleased to sit here today where we've borrowed upwards of $170 million for projects once all is said and done, so.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
your holidays and
Yes.
Happy New Year before you know it.
We'll see you, Brad.
If nothing else, Finance and Facilities Committee meeting adjourned. To the next meeting.